Hi. So the last part of this Quilt As You Go for Crazy Quilts. Now my blocks need to be quilted and I've squared them all up to 17 inches. So what I've done for this part of the demonstration is I've taken, there's two little blocks that I've made earlier, the stitch and flip that you saw a couple of days ago. So what I've done is this technique works for whatever size your blocks could be. It also works if you're going to sew rows together, so it doesn't actually matter what size the piece of work is, but what's important is that there is the pieced work, there is the wadding, and there is the backing. So this is quilted on its own, so that's an important part of this. So one of the benefits of working like this is that you can quilt, okay, we did this one as stitch and flip, but you could quilt this quite easily on any size domestic machine because it will fit in under the machine. You've got plenty of space in the throat, so you could do some quite nice quilting. It also works really well to use some embroidery stitches or whatever you want, or use your walking foot. It's just good to practice. So for this technique, what my aim is to join these two blocks together. So we're going to get like a chevron pattern. Now, the measurements for this vary. You might see some other techniques where people use a different size, and I'm attaching these strips possibly in a different way to one that you've seen me do before. I've just reversed where the strips go, but the technique is exactly the same, so it really doesn't matter. So the two strips that we need is our sashing that is going to be on the back. Now, if it's important that when these pieces are joined together that you don't see this, then try to match that strip to the backing fabric, because you will see that. If you're quite happy for it to become a contrast, then that's fine. And the sashing that's going to be on the front, I'm using a strong contrast to go on there. So it has to be something that is either blends or is a strong contrast. Plain fabrics are probably easier to use, and then or solids, whatever you want. So the measurements. What I've done for the back strip is I've cut that at 1 1/4 inches. So it's 1 1/4 and it's single width. Now, the piece that I'm using on the front of this, now sometimes we've done it where it's the other way round. I have cut this at 2 1/2. So it's a 2 1/2 inch wide strip, and I've folded it wrong sides together. So imagine this as being like we're making binding. Now, if this effect means that the piece where you're going to see this looks too wide, then cut it down to maybe 2 1/4, but be careful because you're going to lose a lot of seam allowance. So I've used 2 1/2 for this demonstration. Have a little play, see what you think. Now, you can be clever and put the strip that's going, the single strip on its own and the folded strip is going on the same edge of the block. So the blocks have been trimmed and each block is exactly the same size. So that's important. It doesn't matter what the size is, but they are all exactly the same. Now, some people feel happy, so the two sets on at the same time. What I tend to do is I sew one strip on, then I turn it over and I sew the other strip on. So that seam edge there actually has 2 rows of stitching. It doesn't matter if you do it in 1 or 2, but I just feel it's easier. So I'm going to join these from the back. So I've got my single edge strip of fabric is along the back, and the folded one is along the front. So we're ignoring this one for now. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to try and do it up here so that you can see, is this block is going to be joined onto this strip. So we're going to put right sides together, so the backs are sitting next to each other, and I'm going to stitch along here, But what's really important is that these edges here match up. So what we don't want is to have them out of alignment like that. So we're going to match those two edges along there. Now, I would either use clips or whatever works for you. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in there, which I don't use pins very often. So I'm going to stitch along there. So I'm just going to make sure that my pattern works. So yeah, I've got my chevrons and I'm using a 1/4 inch foot, and I'm going to stitch through all those layers. Now you might find that you need to make your stitch length a little longer because you're going through lots of layers there. Take the pins out. Now, if we look at the back, there is the sashing. So we've got a nice straight edge there, and we've got a nice straight edge along the bottom, so we know that they're going to line up. And on the front, we go on making our pattern, and what we would do next is fold this piece of sashing over, and you can either use an embroidery stitch to go down there or top stitch it into place, whatever works for you, but you can see the effect. Now, the way we've done it sometimes is we put this piece across the front and we put the folded piece to the back. It really doesn't matter which way you do it. Now, if you're doing this as crazy quilting and you've maybe used embroidery stitches on here, there's no reason why you can't top stitch that into place using an embroidery stitch. If you don't want to see the stitching, then hand slip stitch that into place along there. So what you would do then is join the next two together, and however many are in your row, and then use the same technique along the tops and the bottom to join your rows together. So if this was a large piece of work and we're just joining the rows, you do it exactly the same way. So the same proportion of the width of the strips is exactly the same. It doesn't make any difference what size the piece of work is. So hope that makes sense. Have a go, send me some pictures, and I'll get on with quilting the other one. Okay, bye.